Always all questions are welcome, particularly questions where you think, oh, I shouldn't ask that. Or that's too obvious, or maybe I'll wait and see if someone else asks.
Maybe you could say something about how to incorporate Easter into the Buddhist tradition.
Oh, wow. So the question is how to incorporate Easter into the Buddhist tradition. That's a great question. I've never thought about it once in my life.
Can I say that now?
Yeah, now I'm thinking about it. I think I don't know enough about the meaning of Easter to talk very intelligently about how to bridge between our faith tradition and the Christian tradition. What we did with my own daughter was we just celebrated Easter just like everybody, all the Christian families do. Except we didn't go to church. We hid eggs and gave her a basket. And
So the tradition then, right, with Christianity, and raised in that genre, is that there was a sacrifice made for others. And when I look at it just in that plain context like this, a sacrifice made for others. And there's a lot of different ways people think that sacrifice was manifested. But if you just look at it like that, like how do I do that? Or is there things that I give up so that somebody else would benefit? Like how do I do that? Or how do I not do that to
let's see, Susan in the back and then Zilpa.
Well, I do want to share today, I'm actually going to go to Lutheran Church because I was not raised Lutheran, I was raised Catholic, but I want to see how the Lutherans also celebrate this. And my sense though is what Easter is about it's about the renewing, and basically from my tradition it's about, but I only know, it's from, Christ rising again. So it's also about that renewal. And yeah.
Thank you, Susan. Zilpa, do you want to say something?
For me, it's always about motivation and context. So why would I want to, incorporate? Some people don't, and the context kind of determines that, like how many Christians am I around, I totally forgot it was Easter because I live here. I grew up very fundamental Catholic, so it was a big deal. Even 40 days prior to Easter, we used to celebrate Lent, and everyone practiced some form of ascetic practice. Like as kids, we gave up reading comic books and eating candy for 40 days. That was really big. It was huge, and most of us didn't cheat. So Easter came, so all of a sudden the candy baskets and things were like this really big deal, like a big celebration because you've done this giving up. But that was the old Catholic Church. I don't know what they do now. I don't think they do it the same way. But my thought would be about context is, well, if I was around someone who wanted to have some dialogue about that, I could find some parallel ideas like Mary and Susan were sharing, renewal, sacrifice, and those would be interesting to talk about. But whenever the Dalai Lama is on the interfaith panel, and he's on a lot of them with Christians, Jews, Muslims, he always makes it clear we have some things in common, and he always starts there, like common ethics, 10 Commandments, very common to the 10 destructive actions in Buddhism, or, loving kindness, very common. But he also never waters anything down. There are significant differences in the philosophy and the practice. So he always ends by saying we honor, we respect, and we cherish those ways that we're similar, and we can talk about in a very respectful way the ways we're different. So to me, it kind of brings up all of that. And other than a very quick talk over at the New Seasons with a Jewish young woman who was checking the groceries out, and someone right before me really did an Easter thing. Like, wow, are you having ham? Are you having this? Are you having that? And I could see some kind of look on her face. And when it was my turn, I said, do you celebrate Easter? She said, no, it's not my holiday. I said, yeah, me either. And then we laughed. She said, I'm Jewish. I said, I'm Buddhist. And it was like, oh, that's cool. So that little kind of just, it was kind of nice to kind of acknowledge this isn't something everybody does. And that's okay. And that there are assumptions by some people that we're all doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so
okay.
those are some thoughts.
Yeah.
Jeff has some to add.
Yeah, thanks.
I thought about this morning too. I was raised as a Christian, and the central holiday for Christians is Easter, because the resurrection is this kind of amazing selfless act that Christ did. It's very different from Buddhism in one way, because the context there is redeeming sins, which is different than kind of our bodhisattva view of suffering. Sin and suffering are not similar concepts. But the idea of this large, transcendent act of taking on these other afflictions, you could say. Maybe you could say both suffering and sin are afflictions of humanity. Does have a lot in common with Buddhism in that context. And I remember as a child growing up, well, actually through adulthood, seeing in the churches there was some subset of Christians who really resonated with that quality. It wasn't just the Easter Bunny. There was this moment where you actually put your mind on what Christ did and what it meant. And we, when I was when we were sitting earlier, I was thinking about all the people across the planet right now who might actually be having their mind on what Christ did. And this is one of those moments when the Dalai Lama, I think, when he talks about the things that are similar, it seems like there's a similar quality of meekness that people celebrate on this day if they're Christians, and that relates to some of the meekness that we celebrate in our tradition. And, I remember that from my youth. It was one of my favorite parts of that tradition. So.
Thank you, Chad.
This story's just sort of petering out.
It's okay. It's okay. You don't have to like stick the landing. You had something to say.
I was thinking this morning, because I was going to go here this morning. I was coming here this morning, and I was going to go to an Easter brunch in the afternoon and a Passover Seder tonight. So I thought, I'm kind of hitting all bases, but I was also thinking about the commonality of the themes, and being Jewish myself and having also worked in various Christian organizations before I really understood. I was being raised a secular Jew. I wasn't really all that aware of the sort of religious tenets, but I was really taken by sort of Christian witness, and what that ended up doing, seeing people show up with great, loving compassion. And then also studying in Judaism this sort of concept of, what Passover is sort of, you were once a stranger in the land of Egypt, so you sort of understand who the stranger is, and this I vow, sort of getting rid of this line between you and, your neighbor. And I thought in Buddhism is this sort of way in which you feel, you so love and have such compassion for the other, that you are committed to, the bodhisattva, so let me, and reach enlightenment to help with the enlightenment of others, and so that everybody is free of suffering. And there's such a whole big heart in all of that, I feel, this sort of transcending in all of those, it appears to me the most difficult thing, given that we're sort of animal nature too, and we're pretty territorial, that this transcendence of our humanness. And so in all those and many other traditions, and so I thought of that. And in a sort of spooky moment, I thought I saw this is really hard to say, because what do I know what the face of Christ really actually looks like? But there was a moment in my, normal middle of the night being up, that's this sort of face, and it was sort of tilted, and I was so identified it with Christ. But the thing that happened after was this sort of amazing feeling of compassion and love. It was like, okay, that's all right. Mm-hmm. Then I fell back asleep. So, but that is what I think about those bridges.
Yeah, thank you. All right, is that good?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for the question. Salitra.
A few months ago, I think I asked about emptiness. And so I've been very curious in reading a lot and practicing with this. So Mahamudra, I'm asking this, I'm not saying it, is the attainment of the awareness of emptiness or pure awareness. I'm imagining that happens at some point. Like I imagine the Dalai Lama lives in that state. Am I, so far, is this right?
Well, I think, so the question is Mahamudra a state? that
Or an
one
experience.
attains. And I've been wondering about that myself lately. Like, by calling it enlightenment, it does sound like a state. And it does sound like something that you get there and then you're there. And that's that. Like the Buddha didn't become unenlightened after he became enlightened. He was enlightened. And but what's striking, really, about our tradition is in the 2,500 years since, how many teachers have you heard come out and say, "Oh yeah, I'm enlightened"? Now, maybe there have been teachers that have done that, but probably few would count them as
Teachers.
Some people may count them as teachers, but I think we have questions. They raise more questions than they seem to answer.
And how many have said, I'm not enlightened specifically?
Yes, and then how many of them actually say, no, I'm not enlightened?
No.
So, I think that it's made me wonder if there is a state of enlightenment that one attains and then never goes back from. And it's made me wonder what is the nature of enlightenment. And I've heard some teachers say, I don't think they use the word enlightenment. But they do say that from time to time you do rest in sort of a pure, unadorned awareness of what is. But that isn't something that lasts. Something comes next. And I guess it makes me wonder, oh, well, if you're enlightened, do you just stay there? But I can't relate that to any other experience that I've ever had where I attained something and then that was that. And it just remained that way. So all that's by way of admitting that I don't know the answer to your question. But I love the question, both for myself and I think it's valuable.
One thing, Salitra, noticed when you asked is that does the Dalai Lama live in that state? And we all just stared back. It's because we have no idea. He doesn't announce that. And the only thing I ever read is that he said one time when he had an inference, which is short of a full realization, that it shocked him so much that he couldn't really relate to people for a few weeks. And that's a mere inference. So we can take that back to the sutras where the Buddha, when he experienced enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, decided not to teach, not to speak of it. He finally did, but the sutras somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks. He struggled with what can I say? And all the traditions in Buddhism, I don't know them all, but I've studied a lot of them, say it's beyond concept. That means it's beyond us being able to verbalize. So, but then they all laugh and say, and so we've written 12 books about it. Because we keep seeking, but I think it's helpful to hold in mind it's beyond verbalizing, it's beyond concept when we do this. Then I want to say one thing, and I suspect Bill might be able to help us out here, and Dora. Mahamudra, Maha always meaning great, and Mudra in this case meaning seal, S-E-A-L, the great seal. And as I understand it, what the definition, sinking to concepts again, is it's the great seal of lack of inherent existence that is sealed into every appearance. So it ties to this appearance emptiness, which are not dual. If you imagine my hands going into each other somehow, and then not appearing. Okay, so that's enough confusion from me, but let's see what we can do. Would you like to say anything?
I think when you brought this up before, I think one of the questions that I asked is, what can you do with an answer? What can you actually do with an answer? And that's always interesting to me, because that's the important thing about an answer. If we can offer an answer that actually allows you to do something or make some kind of shift or approach something in some way that things open up more, then we've offered something helpful. So that's always what I try to gain some sense of what can be said that will create some kind of opening. And one of the things that occurs to me is that, and I think it's kind of the way that you frame the question reminds me how much we tend to think of, like, there would be Mahamudra, then there would be the et ceteras. And we're involved in all the et ceteras until this state, or this something, where there's A, B, C, D, and then finally we have Z. And Z is this other thing. And the way that the progression of practice is presented, if you go to all kinds of the formal analysis of the 5 paths and the 10 bhumis, which go into details about how practice actually unfolds, most of it sort of like beyond the first path of the 5 paths, most of it's kind of like, I think that's over the horizon from where I stand. And if the teachings or whatever we read, it really matches our capacity and our interest in just how things are working right now, we might be able to think that, oh, this description of this thing that's over the horizon makes a little sense relative to what I can understand about my current situation. But over the second horizon, the third and fourth and fifth, and when we get into the 10 bhumis and whatnot, it's kind of like, but we can actually look at that. But what I think what's most helpful about that map is that there are all kinds of ways that our experience gradually unfolds. that our confusion unwraps in a gradual way. Not necessarily, and Michael's made the point that it's not necessarily because you have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 through 10 that everything happens in exactly that order. Because he said you could have certain kinds of momentary experiences that are actually would map to some place, but most of the time we're actually stuck somewhere else. We're cycling in other circumstances. But there is a progression, and I think for me one of the things that's helpful is the thought that we could start to have certain kinds of recognition about the nature of our own experience and the nature of our own mind. But all the momentum of our habits would not just shut off. It's not like some kind of salvation from karma. That's just kind of like we're actually apart from this realization, we're still kind of turning on faucets here and there, and we actually haven't even sort of come to grips with the notion of how it is that we do that. We don't necessarily see how it is that we're kind of continually feeding more confusion into our system. And even if we could see that, there's still quite a huge momentum. The bathtub takes a while to drain. And that's the distinction between a Buddha and all the bodhisattvas and all that's wannabe bodhisattvas in various stages, is that the Buddha is spoken of as one where the karma actually is exhausted. But this is helpful for me along the way, because if I think, oh, well, I thought I had a little bit of insight, but then why is this stuff still happening to me? I was like, if I kind of just kind of, now see here, I had this insight, go away, stop bothering me. Karma, beat it. It doesn't work. So then it's like, well, how do we actually relate to all that, the stuff that unfolds from karmic momentum, moment by moment? Then that becomes, as we can relate to that in more and more subtle ways, more and more of it can actually become fuel for insight. At the beginning, the unfolding of our confusion and our habits is quite useful in terms of very, very general lessons about, well, maybe I should stop stealing from my neighbor. These are good lessons. Maybe I should stop engaging in gross aggression and violent speech and aggressive thoughts. All these things are really important, and these things will gradually unfold. And then we can, but we have to kind of see that this stuff is not helpful before we actually will start to move into a point where, how do we actually kind of transform this, use whatever's arising as a kind of a launching point for cultivating something positive, for actually affirming our wish to abandon this pattern. As this really settles in, then it's possible the transformation actually becomes possible. And it's still quite kind of ordinary. But as this goes further, and our attention becomes more and more refined, then the actual ability to recognize these things as they arise. It's not that the karmic momentum will cease, but our ability to recognize what unfolds as it arises, and to have more and more of a sense of the nature of awareness in the appearance emptiness piece, to fall into using that jargon. But this is a process, and I think that that to me is more helpful than kind of going to the end state and trying to get too much of an idea about that. If we understand the process, that actually will help us along the way. And so that's where I go. And what I've basically done here is just talk about the three turnings again.
All three turnings.
The renunciation, the piece of nope, I don't. That's not the confusion is not helpful. Let go of that. The transformation, the ability to engage in actively using antidotes, actively cultivating positive states, actively starting to investigate what's going on, and then as that process stabilizes, then the ability to actually be able to bring just recognition directly to our experience as it arises. And then you can see, as recognition, the one great line, like this arises like leaves no trace, like a bird passing in the sky. When we can see that something can arise, but it doesn't have the power to propel us, then we can see how karma will exhaust itself, because we're not following up with, well, this, then that, then the other thing. We're not following up with confusion. So then we see kind of how karma could exhaust itself. But until it exhausts itself, we don't even say Buddha.
Right.
That's kind of but that's kind of the traditional map.
I mean, it seems, I
Can you talk a little louder?
yes,
so we can-
thanks. So the end, the waking up that you were talking about, Eric, where you've woken up and that's it, and you're, hey, I got to my goal. I think that's not what I'm talking about as much as it feels like the little tiny moments of, the habitual propensity of getting caught in, like, oh, I'm like in this thing and I'm all mixed, I'm one with it, and then I go, oh. And I take a breath. And I come back to myself and back to the teachings. That for me feels like, I don't need to be the Buddha, right? But I have a moment of a feeling like I woke up. I woke up from the dream that I have lived in my entire life. And so it seems like as though those tiny precious moments, like I love reading the Heart Sutra. It's like it just goes deeply inside of me somewhere. And so I don't remember all of those emptinesses as I go through life, but I might remember one in one moment, one day. And it's that, oh, yeah, and so, and I guess my question is like, there's a progression, right? The more we practice, the more we have those moments of not getting caught in our habitual propensities and attachment and aversion and all of it. And it's just a gradual path, right? I think what confounds me is I never hear anybody talking about that path. And maybe I'm not listening, but I want to ask everybody here, like, what is it like for you? Like, what happens for you? Like when you practice all day, do you walk outside and notice that this is a dream? Do you see, like I want to have conversations like that. And like I think that's really what I'm longing for, is a community of exploration on a moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis of the most important thing in our lives. I think, are we really here? And I don't. So I feel like when I asked you about emptiness, I felt kind of silly. It's like, well, can I tell you about this? So I don't know, I just want to bring it up and see if there's a space for those kind of conversations. And maybe the grasping for that is part of my karma.
Would it be something else?
Yes.
Could it be something?
It is something else. So maybe.
yeah, Diane's whispering that there is a little bit of a tradition or a hmm, there's modeling not to talk about one's attainments.
Mm.
And I think because if you have attainment, you recognize how ridiculous it would be to talk about it. Because it doesn't even seem like, it's not something that you did. And so you couldn't, even in the first place, begin to talk about it as something that you own or did, because that's not the experience at all. I had this real worry when I was asked to become a teacher. And I was like, I don't talk to about anybody. I don't talk to anybody about my practice. And I kind of am uncomfortable doing that. And I thought, now am I going to have to do that? And I talked to Bill and Dora and Lama Michael and some of the French lamas, and the conclusion that I came up with, they may have all said this in different ways or explicitly, but was, you don't need to talk about your practice, but you can talk about your experience. And so I thought, okay, I can talk about my experience. I think that, I hope in asking the question that because to me the conversation that we have had is what you're asking for. And if there's something missing from that, maybe you could articulate. But I think that, yes, I hope that what this Q&A time is a time for us all to talk about our experience and questions that arise as a result of our experiences trying to practice. And I hope that it's a rich conversation full of passion and discipline. Cindy?
I'm wondering, Cindy, are you wanting a discussion where people talk about what are their current carrying practices? Like when I get up in the morning, I always use this prayer before I eat breakfast, or I always...
It's like that conversation we had this morning.
Yeah, I mean, is that kind of what you are looking for?
Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, kind of like, what is our practice like, and what do we notice, and I guess more conversation, or more moment to moment sharing of our. I mean, we're all here. We're all dedicated. And I read all these books that talk about it. But we don't, I want to talk about it. What our experiences are, or what our practices are, in a very kind of individual way, I guess, in community.
Well, I will add something, and then we have a comment also. Yeah, it was interesting in becoming in starting to teach. I was all of a sudden trying to talk about stuff that I mean, I presumably I'd been thinking about it all this time, but I'd really never talked to anybody about it. And now people would ask me questions, and I would have to like come up with an answer. And so there was an element of trying that on, and what I've noticed is that, you know, since I'm in that position now, when I talk to people, it comes easier. You know, I have a language to do it. Before I would have just, well, I do it anyway. I mean, I couldn't answer any of the questions that was asked today, but that's okay. I'm comfortable with that, and I think what you're pointing to is that it's true. We save a lot of our dialogue for the Q&A. As a community, maybe that's what you're pointing out. So that's my reflection, and you had.
There's something that I've noticed in the Tibetan traditions in general, but even that varies from one lineage or one group to another. But I find a lot of the discussion is very kind of religious oriented, talk about compassion, talk about loving kindness, talk about ethical conduct, which is all good stuff, don't get me wrong, but sometimes kind of beaten like a dead horse, and very little discussion, if any, about those core Buddhist teachings of the Shunyata, of Dharmakaya, of the 12 links, the things that really sink in and cause the mind to work with really profound notions, and hopefully, come to certain realizations. And I don't see that much of that discussion. Our first and our second and fourth two Thursday discussions kind of gets there, and I'm grateful for that. But it's kind of like we have to go to the bookshelf to get that, which is for me okay, but not for many. And I think discussion around those things where people can share their experiences, or at least concepts around those things, would be really valuable. I don't know if that's kind of where you were coming from or not, but I got a feeling that's what it was.
We're very close to ending. This is a wonderful discussion. I would encourage people to go to Sally and Jeff's class and to come to my training, the mind training, because it has the whole path in it. You can go to those. The trick is, and why the Tibetan tradition, and I think others too, the Zen tradition a little bit I've had contact with, you don't talk about these because the ego will grab it. And we haven't done enough work on the first turning that Bill's talking about. We can say, oh yeah, ethics, 10 destructive, I'm not doing them, but really, we haven't done enough solid foundation of taking the ego down, turning the water faucets off, draining the bathtub, and then we get into this thing that information will get us there. Information will get you so far, so that's why you go to the bookshelf or you come, but the practice, we really have to enhance and encourage ourselves with our practice, our own practice. And the experiences will simply come, and it's very, very hard to keep them away from the ego, the self-aggrandizing ego that wants to think I'm smart enough already to go to the third turning and accomplish it. But that's why they have a lot of Nimdro and a lot of basic stuff in there to get the ego down enough so we can open to the experiences. Not so important maybe to talk about them, but to have them, very important. So.
Thank you for the discussion, and let's dedicate the merit.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.